Walter Jenkins woke to find a bright yellow boot clamped on the front tire of his pickup and not a soul in sight. The dry morning air of mid-October in Willow Hills carried a whisper of autumn through the cracked sidewalks and mesquite-lined cul-de-sac. Walter squinted against the rising sun, one hand shielding his eyes as he approached his truck, parked neatly, as always, along the curb in front of his modest ranch-style home. The boot gleamed like a cautionary badge of dishonor against the dust-gray paint of his 2004 Ford F-150. His breath hitched. He bent closer, joints protesting, and read the attached citation folded beneath the windshield wiper. Unauthorized overnight parking, as per HOA bylaw 4.27. The wording was stiff, cold, unsigned. No warnings, no conversation, just this. He stood still for a moment. In the silence, he could hear the hum of irrigation sprinklers down the street and the distant chirp of a mockingbird. His neighbors, Rue 2 doors down and Greg across the street, were outside too, pretending to examine rose bushes or adjust sprinklers, eyes darting toward him and quickly away. No one waved, no one asked. Of course they didn't. The HOA had been sending vague letters for weeks, but he hadn't imagined they'd go this far. Walter ran a thumb over the edge of the paper. There had been talk, muttered over backyard fences or during quiet walks at dusk, about the new HOA president, some woman named Sharon who had big plans for the neighborhood. He hadn't paid much attention. Willow Hills had always been quiet, predictable. That was part of the charm when he and Elaine moved in 35 years ago. Now he felt like a stranger. 30 minutes later, after managing to phone the enforcement hotline voicemail and scribbling down a note for himself to call again after 9, Walter made his way to Highway Diner, where the vinyl booths cracked like old leather and the coffee never stopped flowing. Maggie spotted him through the front window and had already poured him a cup by the time he walked in. "Morning, Mr. Jenkins," she chirped, sliding the mug across the counter with practiced ease. "You look like a man who's been booted." Walter offered a humorless chuckle. "You got a crystal ball back there?" He settled into his usual spot, third stool from the end, the one with the wobble he never reported. The place smelled of bacon and burnt toast, and from a nearby radio perched on a shelf, Merle Haggard's drawl drifted lazily through the air. "They cleaned my truck, overnight parking violation," he muttered. Maggie blinked. "Your truck? But you park there all the time." "Exactly." She shook her head. "Echo." He nodded and sipped his coffee. It tasted metallic today, or maybe that was just his mood. "Bunch of folks have been whispering," Maggie said, wiping the counter with a damp rag. "Some new blood on the board got more rules than the sheriff's office." Walter reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the letter, unfolding it with care as though it were something living. "Gee." Maggie leaned in but kept a respectful distance. Her eyes scanned the formal typeface. "As per bylaw 4.27, she read. Sounds like they're quoting a space station manual. Walter huffed. No explanation, just the boot. Feels like a warning. The bell above the door jingled, and JJ ambled in. Walter's poker night buddy and occasional drinking companion. He wore a beat-up U.S. Navy cap and smelled faintly of menthol. "Booted, huh?" JJ asked as he plopped into the seat beside him. "Word travels fast. Greg saw it this morning, said he damn near dropped his hose." Walter smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. JJ glanced at the letter, then back at Walter. "You ever think about buying the whole street? That'd fix 'em." Walter rolled his eyes. "Sure, I'll just dip into the fund Elaine left me and scoop up a cul-de-sac." "I'm serious," JJ said, eyes gleaming with something playful and something else. "Old zoning map still public. Plenty of weird parcels out there." Walter waved him off. "I called the HOA this morning. Got a recording. They'll review my case within 10 business days." Maggie returned with a fresh pot and topped off their mugs. "Only in Willow Hills do we get penalized for parking near our own homes," she muttered. Walter dug into his wallet, pulled out a few worn bills, and then meticulously counted out exact change for the tip. 2 quarters, 2 dimes, and a nickel. It was a habit he'd kept from his years working with blueprints and budgets, before pensions and pills became the norm. As he stood to leave, JJ slid his phone across the counter. On the screen was a grainy satellite image of the neighborhood. "You ever heard of Lot 22C?" Lot 22C was a sliver of scrubland behind the HOA clubhouse, technically private, legally forgotten. Walter adjusted his reading glasses and peered over JJ's shoulder at the printout spread across his garage workbench. The zoning map, a faded copy with highlighted borders, looked like a puzzle missing half its pieces. JJ jabbed at one of the marked lines with a stubby finger. "Out here," he said. "Lot 22C, sandwiched between the back fence of the clubhouse and that old canal easement." Walter rubbed his jaw. "Doesn't even look like you could fit a lawn chair on it." JJ grinned. "You don't need to. You just need to own it." The garage smelled faintly of Solar and pine cleaner. Walter had been halfway through rewiring an old Zenith radio before JJ showed up, waving municipal printouts like a man holding treasure. The thought that JJ's joke at the diner had turned into a mid-morning field trip was more amusing than Walter cared to admit. He squinted at the print. "You're sure this borders the clubhouse?" "Technically," JJ said. "You remember that little gravel road behind it? HOA uses it to bring in fertilizer and gear for those weekend lawn makeovers. 22C straddles that path." Walter leaned back on the wooden stool and folded his arms. His garage door stood open, letting in the warm Arizona sun and the chirping of finches nesting in the eaves. Across the street, a woman walked her terrier and gave Walter a brief, nervous wave. He nodded politely. HOA anxiety was the new neighborhood weather. "We should go see it," JJ said. "You ever just looked at it?" "Not since the clubhouse remodel. Elaine and I went to one of those ice cream socials back in, must have been '02. JJ's chuckle came low and easy. "Come on, I'll drive. My knees don't care for city hall benches." They parked half a block away, careful not to draw attention. The clubhouse sat prim and bland in stucco beige, its back gate flanked by chain link and wilted oleanders. Beyond that, the lot. Walter approached it slowly, eyes scanning for signs, literal or figurative, of trespassing. A dusty, pre-made property sign hung sideways from a single nail, swaying in the breeze like it was embarrassed to still be there. The scrubland itself was maybe 30 feet wide and ran the length of the clubhouse fence. Weeds grew in dry tufts. A cracked cinder block rested beside a rusted rake. "Looks abandoned," Walter said. "Because it is," JJ replied. "It's just never been worth enough for anyone to bother." But worth, Walter thought, wasn't always about money. Later that afternoon, they drove to the Glendale Municipal Records Office, a squat tan building that looked like it hadn't been painted since Reagan was in office. Inside, the air was cool and still, thick with the scent of old paper and floor wax. The clerk behind the counter, an older man with bifocals and a cardigan that matched his eyebrows, greeted them with the kind of patience earned over decades of public service. Walter, never one to waste the government worker's time, came prepared. He laid out the lot number, property line coordinates, and even produced a folded map with JJ's annotations. The clerk leaned forward slowly. "Lot 22C, you said?" "Yes, sir." He clicked at a faded keyboard, then rose and disappeared into a back room lined with filing cabinets. Walter used the pause to unwrap a sandwich he'd packed that morning, peanut butter and banana on whole wheat. He offered JJ half, but the old man waved him off with a grin. After several minutes, the clerk returned with a manila folder and set it on the counter. He adjusted his glasses. "Well, I'll beat," he said, flipping through the yellowed pages. "Nobody's touched this parcel since 1988. Walter arched a brow. "So, it's still available?" The clerk gave a slow nod. "Listed under miscellaneous city holdings. Zoned as residential but too narrow for a structure. We usually list these for private sale by inquiry." JJ gave a low whistle. "You believe in signs, Walt?" Walter chuckled and reached into his wallet. Inside was a tightly folded envelope with cash. He'd been meaning to deposit it, but somehow this felt more urgent. "I'm an old school man," Walter said, counting out the bills. "And I believe in old school rules." The clerk blinked at the currency. "Well, I suppose we can start the application with a deposit." He handed over a basic form. Walter filled it in with careful penmanship, circling interested buyer and scrawling his name with a practiced hand. Outside, the sun had dipped behind a bank of clouds, casting a pale golden hue over the dry landscape. JJ folded the city paperwork and slid it into a folder marked Personal Shenanigans. As they passed the diner on the way back, Maggie was wiping down an outdoor table. She caught sight of them and raised an eyebrow. "You stirring up trouble again, Walt?" Walter grinned. "Just gardening in new places." JJ leaned against the car, arms crossed, a sly smirk growing beneath his whiskers. "Guess it's about to get interesting." A week later, Walter's new lot bore a fresh post and wire fence and a no access sign in clean block letters. He stood back, sweat beading beneath his cap, and admired the work. The Arizona sun had just begun its mid-morning glare, casting shadows from the fence posts like sundials on the sandy ground. Each post was spaced with a carpenter's precision, wire taut between them. The sign bolted dead center. A quiet kind of satisfaction crept into Walter's chest. Not pride, exactly. Something older. Firmer. The soil was dry, but not unforgiving. He dug the holes himself, using an old auger and more muscle memory than actual muscle. JJ had offered to help, but Walter declined. Some things, especially at his age, you do yourself or not at all. Behind the fence, the back gate of the Willow Hills HOA clubhouse stood slightly ajar. For years, that back road had been the unspoken access point for landscapers, delivery trucks, even teenagers sneaking through for shortcuts. Now, it led to private land. His land. He brushed dust from his hands and caught the faint sound of a country tune drifting from a neighbor's garage. Something from the 70s. Slow steel guitar, talk of trains and gone loves. It tugged at the corners of his memory. Elaine used to hum it while folding laundry. By the time he got home and cleaned up, the letter had already reached the HOA inbox. Marlene Crowley, HOA president, mid-60s and never seen without a folder under one arm, stood stiff back inside the over-air-conditioned clubhouse. The building itself was a caricature of suburban overkill. Perfectly trimmed hedges, color-matched mulch, a plaque that read "Pride of Willow Hills" beside a fountain that hadn't worked in 2 years. "This cannot be right," Marlene hissed, stabbing a finger at the scanned deed in her inbox. "He bought the lot?" "The city confirmed it," muttered Dan, the HOA's part-time treasurer and full-time fence sitter. I-22C is supposed to be unused residual space. We've always assumed, Dan interrupted gently, but legally, it's his. Marlene's lips thinned. Outside, the heat shimmered on the sidewalk. Walter sipped iced tea on Ruth's porch, legs stretched out, boots dusty. Ruth had shown up an hour earlier, basket in hand, iced peach tea sloshing in mason jars. "So," she said lightly, "you really put up that fence?" "Oh, I did." She offered a jar, sturdy work. My Stan would have admired the corners. He nodded in thanks. "You know," she added, settling into a creaky wicker chair, "there was a time the kids sledded down that hill, well, when we had more rain. Back when Harold Martin ran the HOA, he even set up hot cocoa stands for them." Walter smiled faintly. "Harold's not around anymore." "No," she said. "Now we got laminated signs." They sat in companionable silence for a beat. Then Ruth leaned forward just slightly. "Marlene's gonna pitch a fit?" "She already is," he said. "Called an emergency meeting for noon. She thinks it's sabotage." Walter looked out across the street where the clubhouse's stucco walls gleamed too brightly under the sun. "It's not sabotage if it's legal." Ruth clinked her ice and let the silence answer for her. Inside the clubhouse, folding chairs scraped against linoleum as board members gathered. JJ slipped in the back row, arms crossed. A few other residents filtered in, mostly curious, some irritated. Marlene stood at the front, her pearl necklace taut against her throat. "As of this morning," she began, "Mr. Walter Jenkins has erected a private fence across what has long been accepted as community access." Murmurs, frowns. One neighbor whispered, "He can't do that, can he?" Marlene held up the deed like a courtroom exhibit. "Legally, the lot is now his, but let me be clear, this is sabotage of shared property, a hostile act against the spirit of this neighborhood." JJ chuckled under his breath. From the back, Walter stepped forward. No notes, no folder. Just the quiet steadiness of a man who'd lived through more than property disputes. He met Marlene's glare and said evenly, "You started it with a boot." By Monday morning, HOA bylaws had been rewritten overnight and without warning. Walter found the envelope tucked halfway into his mailbox, the kind of thick, glossy packet that felt corporate just from the way it resisted being bent. The return address was the Willow Hills Homeowners Association. No stamp, hand delivered. He looked up and down the quiet cul-de-sac. The air was already warm, climbing toward another dry October day. No one in sight, only a mockingbird calling from the top of the lamp post. He carried the envelope to his porch, set down his coffee beside his tape measure. He'd been double-checking the distance between his fence posts again, more out of habit than worry, and opened the packet. Inside, 36 pages, tabbed in red and yellow, with a newly printed cover. Amendments to the Willow Hills Residential Covenant effective immediately. He skimmed the table of contents. Section 6.4, Restrictions on Visual Obstructions Adjacent to Common Property. Section 8.2, Temporary Structures and Encroachments, expanded definitions. Section 11.3, Adjacency Conduct and Community Harmony. He gave a low whistle and sat back in the old wicker chair, flipping pages. Everything about the language felt weaponized. What once had been vaguely worded suggestions now read like legal traps. There were guidelines about materials that disrupt visual consistency, rules forbidding barriers of adversarial implication, and a new clause limiting use of formerly overlooked parcels in contradiction to neighborhood harmony. Walter folded the packet closed, set it on his lap, and took a long sip from his chipped mug. The coffee had gone cold. An email notification buzzed on his phone. Another message from the HOA. Subject line, Security and Preservation, Immediate Enhancements. He opened it. The message was signed, Respectfully, for Order and Decency, Willow Hills Board. A line near the end caught his attention. Installation of observational safety devices will commence this week as part of our Enhanced Oversight Initiative. He knew enough double-speak to read between those lines. Down the street, Ruth appeared around the corner carrying a manila envelope in a pink bakery box. She waved and made her way up his walk. "Morning," she said. "You get your love letter?" Walter tapped the envelope on his lap. "All 36 pages." "Well," she said, handing him the box, "I brought Constellation lemon bars. And these." She held up the envelope. "Photos," she explained, "from the last real Halloween party we had, before Marlene and her iron clipboard." Walter took the envelope and pulled out a few glossy prints. One showed the clubhouse front yard strung with orange lights, kids in plastic fangs and dollar store capes running wild. Another had Ruth in a witch's hat, stirring punch from a crock pot. That was 2019, she said, before they started banning decorations for liability reasons. He smiled faintly, holding one photo toward the light. Elaine would have loved this. They sat together a while. Ruth didn't ask questions. She never did unless they mattered. That afternoon, Walter went to Highway Diner. Maggie filled his coffee without asking and leaned on the counter like she always did when she had something to say. She probably shouldn't. "You've stirred the hornet's nest now, Mr. Jenkins," she murmured. "They rewrote the bylaws," he said, not quite a question. "They always meet quiet on Sundays," she replied. "You'd be surprised what gets decided before the first pew fills up. Back home, he started a notebook. Not emails, not texts. Paper. A long-used yellow legal pad with a pencil sharpened just so. He listed each new clause, noted the date, who was seen delivering the envelope, any wording that contradicted previous versions. That evening, from the back porch, Walter saw the new addition. A black, dome-shaped camera mounted high on the clubhouse corner, aimed directly at Lot 22C. It blinked a red light, rhythmic and precise. Across the table at poker night, JJ fanned out a winning hand but didn't smile. "Time to talk to the city council?" he asked, voice low. That Friday, every pumpkin on Willow Hills Lane disappeared before sundown. It happened quietly, with no witnesses and no mess. One moment, porches glowed with autumn orange, fat gourds, and hand-painted jack-o'-lanterns lined front steps, some lopsided, others proud with crooked smiles. By twilight, they were gone, all of them. Walter noticed first from his porch rocker. He'd just turned off the old transistor radio after a scratchy rendition of Monster Mash and looked across the street, where the Chouas had placed a pair of smiling pumpkins that morning. Now their stoop was bare. He stood, eyebrows tightening. His own pumpkin, which had sat beside the mailbox with a carved crescent grin, was missing too. Not smashed, not rolled into the street by teenagers, just gone. Ruth called minutes later. "Walt," she said, low and urgent. "They took mine too. And the ghost I tied to my porch post." He was already grabbing his sweater. "I'll be right over." By the time he reached her place, Ruth had unrolled a long sheet of freezer paper across her kitchen island, scribbling rough sketches of her backyard with a black Sharpie. She pointed at bushes, planters, walking stones. "I've got enough space to zigzag a path," she said. "Kids can come through the back gate, no porch, no street. Technically not visible from HOA easement." Walter leaned over the sketch. "You thinking jack-o'-lanterns?" "No," she said, "too obvious. But I can string fairy lights and cover the planters with fabric ghosts. I've got some old pillowcases and cheesecloth." "You'll need stands," he muttered. "PVC maybe, wood stakes. I've got leftover conduit in the garage." The HOA had issued no official warning, but by early evening the neighborhood group chat lit up. Screenshots flew back and forth. Photo evidence of porches cleared, of signs taped to clubhouse doors. "Reminder, no unauthorized holiday displays per Article 9.4. Someone posted, "Even the paper ghosts? Really?" Another message, "Our porch pumpkins are gone, not even a note." Walter scrolled through the comments, then set the phone face down. His kids, now grown with families of their own, had once spent weeks choosing costumes. In 1977, little Ben had been a pirate with a paper towel roll telescope. Ellie had gone as a butterfly, wings made of wire hangers and pantyhose. He still remembered pinning the wings to her jacket as Merle Haggard played softly from the kitchen radio. Back in his garage, Walter pulled out tools with quiet determination. Sawhorses, his cordless drill, a can of matte black X, spray paint for disguise. He sanded down edges, tied cheesecloth over bent hangers. Ruth arrived an hour later with homemade caramel corn and a roll of extension cords. "We'll start early," she said, "before the patrols begin." The Choys swung by, too. They were in their 30s, new to the block, always polite but cautious. Mrs. Choi held a small plastic cauldron. "We brought glow sticks and allergy-safe candy," she said. "Is that okay?" Walter smiled. It was exactly okay. By 9, the backyard path was nearly done, spindly ghosts flapping softly, a few mason jars glowing faintly on fence posts. The wind picked up just enough to rustle dried leaves. It wasn't much, but it was something. A crunch of gravel out front made Walter freeze. He peeked around the corner. An HOA patrol volunteer stood on the sidewalk, phone raised. The man, late 50s, lean with sunken eyes, snapped a photo of Walter's driveway. No words, no greeting, just a mechanical click. "For monitoring purposes," he muttered, then turned and walked off. Walter watched him go, jaw tight. From behind him, Ruth emerged with a cardboard box of plastic spiders. "Don't let it ruin the mood," she said softly. He said nothing. Instead, he turned to resecure a string of lights that had come loose. Later, back at his place, Maggie's knock was a welcome break. She held a small brown paper bag. "Meanie pumpkin pie," she whispered, "off-the-record treat. You didn't get him from me." He laughed and handed her exact change anyway. As they stood in the doorway, the faint sound of children's laughter echoed from a block over. Someone else trying, quietly, to salvage Halloween. Ruth had stayed behind to tweak the last stretch of the path. As she left, she leaned toward Walter and said, almost inaudibly, "They can ban decorations, but not kindness." At 6:45 a.m., Walter caught 2 HOA contractors inside Lot 22C lifting the side latch on his fence. The morning fog hung low, rolling across a dry patch of land like spilled milk. Walter had just stirred his instant coffee, grumbling under his breath, "Should have gone with Folgers," when he glanced out the kitchen window and froze. 2 figures moved within the boundaries of Lot 22C right past the no-access sign. They weren't neighbors, no clipboard, just a bolt cutter, a steel toolbox, and matching navy polos stitched with H. He set his mug down, grabbed the old camcorder from the side table, and stepped outside. "Morning," he called out, his voice cool. The 2 men looked up, startled. One let go of the latch. The other straightened quickly, then bent to pretend he was inspecting a patch of dirt. "You planning on digging something here?" Walter asked. He held the camcorder in plain view. "We're authorized," one of them muttered. "Got paperwork?" "Marilee said to check drainage near the clubhouse. Access path cuts through here." Walter zoomed in slow and steady. You do know this is private property. We have easement rights, the taller one said, his gaze darting to the fence post. It's in the new rules. Walter smiled thinly. Which bylaw? Neither answered. They left. Minutes later, muttering between themselves as they crossed back toward the clubhouse. One glanced behind as if checking for signs of pursuit. Walter stood silently beside the freshly folded lawn chair he'd placed near the fence the day before, just watching. By 8, JJ was over with a metal box under his arm and a thermos of diner coffee. You got him on tape? Every word, Walter said, rewinding the camcorder. Even the part where they couldn't name the bylaw. JJ nodded. Time for reinforcements. They spent the next hour setting up a second camera, this one smaller, tucked near the base of the post where the latch had been tampered with. JJ used zip ties like he'd been doing it for years. Used to be a mailman, he muttered. I know all the angles. Back inside, Walter pulled out his manila folder labeled HOA correspondence. He leafed through copies of citations, newsletter clippings, and the new bylaws. The section about easement rights was vague, buried between clauses about trash bin placement and acceptable mulch colors. He picked up the phone and called his old poker buddy, Frank, now working part-time in the city's legal office. I've got footage of unauthorized entry, Walter said plainly. Want to see it? By noon, the reply came, not from Frank directly, but from the city clerk's office. Pending investigation, HOA clubhouse operations are suspended due to zoning concerns, effective immediately. It was on paper, signed, stamped, and thanks to Walter, slid neatly under Marlene Crowley's door. Around mid-afternoon, an HOA blast email arrived in every resident's inbox. The subject line, temporary reorganization of clubhouse use. The language was defensive, riddled with passive phrasing. Due to circumstances, external complaints, temporary municipal review. Nowhere did it mention Lot 22C. But the building's doors were locked, its lights off. Ruth came by with lemonade and a folded lawn chair. Saw the email, she said. Can't say I'm weeping. Walter nodded and tapped the camcorder resting on his lap. Evidence does have a way of cutting through noise. Later, Maggie swung by on her break, still in her apron. Heard you close down City Hall's favorite hangout, she joked, slipping him a wrapped cinnamon bun. I just asked a few questions, Walter replied. The day cooled, shadows stretching longer across the yard. From his porch, Walter could see Lot 22C resting quietly, fence intact, latch secure. The new sign stood straight and clear. No one had tried again. At dusk, as he stirred a second cup of coffee, real grounds this time, not that instant stuff, there was a knock on the door. Linda stood there, clutching a manila envelope of her own. She looked uncertain, but her voice was steady. You're going to the hearing, right? The room was packed, not for zoning updates, but to see Walter Jenkins go toe-to-toe with the HOA. Folding chairs lined the back of Glendale Civic Center's public chamber, and every one of them was full. Latecomers leaned against walls or peeked through the hallway windows, the air thick with quiet murmurs and the occasional creak of shifting weight. The council's old mic balanced precariously on a metal stand, whined as a technician adjusted it. Evoking a collective wince, Walter took his seat near the front, briefcase resting on his lap, the same one he used to haul engineering schematics back in the ADS. JJ nudged his elbow and offered a paper cup of bitter hallway coffee. Better than the diners, he whispered with a wink. Walter managed to smirk, but said nothing. His eyes fixed on the council panel ahead. Council Chair Arnold Delaney, a silver-haled man with rimless glasses and the patience of a librarian, tapped the mic. We're here to review an escalating dispute between the Willow Hills HOA and a private property owner. His voice was measured, clipped. Mr. Jenkins, you may begin. Walter stood, calm and deliberate. He opened the briefcase and withdrew a manila folder, then another, each labeled in neat block print. He placed one document on the podium, angled toward the council. This is the deed to Lot 22C. Issued in my name and approved by the county clerk on October 23rd. He tapped the paper. This is the HOA's own bylaw, 4.27, which outlines visual obstruction but contains no reference to easement rights for non-simmered property. A hum rippled through the back rows. Marlene Crawley shifted in her chair beside the HOA board. Her smile was taut, hands clasped tightly atop her notes. When she stood to respond, her heels clicked sharply on the floor. Mr. Jenkins's purchased borders common property. Our legal team believes historical usage qualifies as implied easement. Our staff has used that access for years. Walter raised a hand gently. I recorded the most recent usage. Two contractors entered without notice, couldn't cite a bylaw, and left once confronted. Councilman Delaney adjusted his glasses. Do you have that footage? JJ stood and wheeled a laptop cart forward, the kind borrowed from the public library's basement. The screen lit up Lot 22C, early morning fog, two figures climbing the fence. The room hushed as the grainy video played. Walter's voice rang clear, polite yet firm, as he asked for identification. The silence that followed spoke louder than any rebuttal. Then JJ, still standing, held up a folded printout. Also, here's a copy of a citation Marlene signed herself last October for Ruth Kim's holiday porch display, clause 3.16, decorations. But this year, the board claimed no holiday displays were ever allowed. Selective enforcement. Marlene interjected. That's out of context. I was denied Clubhouse access after a PTA meeting, Linda's voice cut through from halfway down the aisle. She rose, envelope in hand. No reason given. I was told it was under review. One by one, residents stood. A retired couple who hadn't dared paint their mailbox, a young father whose daughter's sidewalk chalk had been cited as vandalism. Words like intimidation, overreach, and bullying echoed louder with each testimony. The council retired to a side chamber, the audience buzzed with restrained energy, JJ bouncing on his heels, Ruth fanning herself with the program schedule. Walter sat motionless, hands clasped in his lap. 10 minutes later, the panel returned. Chairman Delaney leaned toward the mic. Effective immediately, the Willow Hills HOA executive authority is suspended pending a full re-election overseen by city observers. Ms. Crowley is hereby removed from her current role. Marlene stiffened but said nothing. She gathered her papers with rigid hands. A wave of restrained cheers swept the room, clapping, soft calls of thank you, heads nodding in Walter's direction. He stood quietly, collected his briefcase, and made his way toward the exit. Outside, the evening had cooled. The Civic Center's front steps glowed under aging lamplight. Ruth caught up beside him, adjusting her cardigan and leaning in. You gonna run, Wild? Walter smiled faintly. No need. I've got a better idea. Halloween night returned to Willow Hills, this time with porch lights on and laughter in the air. The cul-de-sac shimmered under strands of orange and purple bulbs, stretched from mailbox to mailbox. Paper lanterns bobbed in the breeze, each one crafted from recycled lunch sacks, tea lights flickering within. Children darted between houses, their giggles rising like wind chimes. It was the kind of evening the neighborhood hadn't seen in years, not since the bylaws thickened and the decorations vanished. Walter stood at the edge of his driveway, the gravel beneath his feet giving softly with every shift. Jenkins Way, read the modest wooden sign by the new garden path, carved by JJ with a pocket knife and a steady hand. The mesquite sapling he'd planted earlier that week stood nearby, supported by a ring of smooth river stones. He'd dressed simply, pressed slacks, plaid shirt, suspenders, and carried a box of costume odds and ends from his attic. A pirate hat, a feathered mask, a set of rubber fangs. As children passed, he let them dig through it. One boy, maybe 7, plucked the pirate hat and shouted, "Aye!" before disappearing into the stream of kids. Ruth approached from the potluck tables, balancing 2 cups of warm apple cider. "Still not running for anything?" she asked, passing him a cup. Walter took it, nodding in thanks. "I showed up. That's enough." She nudged his shoulder, smiling. "You did more than show up." Across the street, folding chairs lined the entrance to the clubhouse. A handwritten sign taped over the original plaque read, "Welcome to the Porchlight Room. All neighbors welcome." Linda, clipboard in hand, chatted with Greg and the Chua, gesturing toward a printed draft of the new charter. Ballot boxes sat nearby. Not for elections, but for ideas. JJ stood at the buffet, juggling a plate of brisket and a pumpkin cupcake. "We're doing a haunted spaceship theme next year," he called out. "Fog machines on order. Think it'll clear customs?" Walter sipped his cider and chuckled. "Only if you bring fireworks." Laughter rolled across the lawn like a breeze. The old clubhouse, once rigid with laminated rules, now spilled warmth from its open doors. Inside, 70s music played on a refurbished turntable someone had pulled from their garage. Someone else had hung paper stars from the ceiling. No one asked for permits. Near the back fence, Ruth showed Linda a sketch on lined paper, an idea for a founder's bench, to be placed under the mesquite tree. "It's for everyone who stood their ground," she said, "with kindness." Walter lingered by the path. A small child dropped a wrapped candy, turned to look, but Walter bent down first and handed it back with a soft smile. "Keep it safe, Captain," he said, nodding at the pirate hat. The night settled, not with silence, but with fullness. Plates clinked, cider steamed in cups, and laughter spilled through windows that hadn't opened in years. Under the low porch light, Walter reached into his coat pocket and removed a brass plaque, etched with care. He knelt by the mesquite, placed it gently into the soil's edge. "This space belongs to every kind neighbor who ever stood their ground with grace." He stood back, took in the view. Children laughing, Ruth chatting near the table, Linda waving over a signature sheet, JJ trying to light a candle in a carved squash. The driveway stretched before him, long and well lit. Oh, on a night once claimed by silence, porch lights shimmered again, casting soft shadows of laughter and lanterns across Willow Hills. What began with a yellow boot became a quiet stand that reminded a neighborhood of its shared voice. When power goes unchecked, it grows brittle, but when people come together, with patience and principle, it bends toward fairness. Like a single porch light left on in the dark, one steady act of kindness can guide a street home. Perhaps it's never too late to stand with your neighbors and reclaim the warmth that rules were meant to protect.